In its most common use, analogy is a comparison between things that have similar features, often used to help explain a principle or idea. A person can make or draw an analogy between the seasons of the year and the stages of life. People also reason by way of analogy. Abandoning a project is like leaving a house partially built. Here's a special analogy. Christians are caretakers. Most of us like to think our property belongs to us. That's why we find it difficult and we even rebel at the idea that we own nothing. Yet the truth is, our property, our time, our talents, our health, our spouse, our children, even we ourselves belong to God, our Creator. We are simply caretakers of all we possess, employed by God to look after that which He has entrusted to our care. Anything we acquire in this life is simply on loan. Can we use analogies to simplify evidence for the Genesis creation account? Is it possible to grasp challenging technical concepts and avoid information overload? Let's discover the importance of using simple analogies to help people truly understand the evidence in a way they can share with others. Coming up on today's edition of Origins, Powerful Analogies with J. Seegert. Hello, welcome to Origins. I'm Ray Heiple, and it's an honor to be your host today. During this program, we showcase interesting guests who present evidence from science along with other important facts, validating the truth of creation and the accuracy of the Bible. Today's guest, J. Seegert, is an author and international speaker and holds degrees in both physics and engineering technology. He currently serves as the managing director of the Starting Point Project, which defends the Christian worldview, and he is also the president of Logos Research Associates. Jay has been speaking on the authority of Scripture for over 38 years. Welcome to the program, Jay.
Great to be on the show.
So we're going to be looking at powerful analogies, analogies being stories that are like something else. What brings the power to the analogy?
Well, it's an effective communication tool. I'm in the process of putting together a video training series on apologetics and a lot of different things beyond the facts that are going to help people. So by using analogies, there are many benefits to it, one of which is it helps people relate to what you're saying because it gets a focus off of the specifics and puts it on the analogy itself. It greatly simplifies complex subjects, and when we're talking about creation, evolution, it can get fairly complex. It enables people to convey the logic to others. They may not understand the technical science, but if they understand the analogy, they can share that analogy with someone else. Helps them avoid information overload. When we get overly technical, sometimes it's a little bit too much, so an analogy kind of takes a break from that. It strengthens your argument because, again, people understand the point that you're trying to make. And then it also puts things in context, especially large numbers, and we'll have an example of that at the end of the program.
So we're really looking at method here. We're not looking at giving people a bunch of information, but hey, this is how you can better present your information, talking about something that everybody knows and using that being similar to this point of creation or point of argument against evolution, and people can see it easily then.
Makes our communication much more effective. So with that, we will get started.
Let's go ahead and get started.
Even Jesus himself used analogies, so that's a good example for us. Matthew 7:24 through 27. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man that had built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. So Jesus used a simple analogy of the foundation of a rock versus sand. Everyone can relate to that. They get the point here. So again, analogies are very powerful for getting our points across.
Not only that, Jay, but it's memorable, right? As soon as you start to tell that story, I mean, people, if they've heard it even just a few times over their lives, they remember that. They remember the man who built his house on the rock and the man who built his house on the sand. And of course, the point is, if you do my words, you listen to my words and do them, you're going to be founded upon a firm foundation. But if you don't, well, you're going to be tossed to and fro.
Yeah. That's an additional benefit, that people will actually remember it longer. Another analogy, this goes back to the infancy of the intelligent design movement. We can go back to William Paley. He was one of the original pioneers in the late 1700s. He came up with a very powerful, simple analogy. He talked about walking through a countryside. He said if his foot kicked upon a stone like this, he really wouldn't wonder, how did that get there? But if you kick something like this pocket watch, you would instantly wonder, how did this get here and who made it? Because he could see the design in it in what we would today call specified complexity. So the analogy here is, you see something like this out in the woods, in the countryside or whatever, you know it's not something natural there. Somebody made it and they or someone else left it there. So again, powerful analogy. Fast forwarding a little bit to a current intelligent design movement, we have something called irreducible complexity, which Dr. Michael Behe drafted in his book Darwin's Black Box. And this is one of the simplest analogies and most effective that I've seen, and many people have probably seen this one before. He brought up the concept of a mousetrap. Everyone's familiar with these. A mousetrap has 5 parts to it. The hammer there is the mouse's least favorite part. I did a survey and 10 out of 10 came back, yep, that's the one that gets them every time. And then you have the trigger where you put the cheese, you have the spring, you have the latch that holds everything back, and then you have the wooden base. 5 parts. If you were to take just one of these 5 parts away, how well would the mousetrap work? Would it work 4/5 as well? No, it wouldn't work at all. You take the spring away, there's nothing to bring the hammer over. Take the wooden base away, there's nothing to hold the pieces together. You need all 5 parts in the right place at the right time for this to function. So this could not evolve one piece at a time because it can't function until everything's there. And the analogy drawn to the real world of creation evolution, there are many complex things out there that you cannot evolve one piece at a time. They're intricately designed, and this is an analogy that helps people get that, and then they can share that analogy with others as well.
So everything has to be there or it's worthless. And the idea behind evolution that you get these advantageous changes, well, there's no advantageous change to get 4 out of 5 parts to a mousetrap. You just wasted a lot of energy and you get nothing back from it.
It's kind of an all or nothing thing, definitely. We can also use an analogy to talk about some of the limitations behind intelligent design. Intelligent design movement has produced a lot of awesome evidence, but there are some limitations as well. Analogy that I came up with is, if you walked into a room and you saw this cake sitting on a pedestal, you would instantly know that somebody made the cake. You might not even consciously think that. You could look at it closer, see how many layers there are, what kind of frosting was used. Those details would further confirm somebody made the cake. But you could look at those details all day long and they would never tell you who made the cake, why they made the cake, what they want you to do with the cake, and what they want you to do whenever you're done doing whatever they want you to do with the cake. You couldn't get that information from looking at these physical details. However, if the creator of the cake left you a note, then you could know. Hi, my name is Susie, I made the cake for you, have a piece, and then just walk away, I'll clean up afterwards. You could know that if the creator left you a note. Now, it's the same thing with the universe that we're living in. There's so much evidence that this world we're living in is not an accident. It was designed. But you could look at these details all day long, all lifelong, and they would never tell you who made the universe, why they made it, or what happens to us when we die. But if the creator of the universe left you a note, you could know, and that's exactly what the Bible claims to be. It claims to be a message from the God who created everything saying, hello, I'm the one who did all this. This is why I created it. This is what happened to it. Here's my plan to fix it, and here's what happens to you when you die. You could know those things if you had a message from the creator. So intelligent design can get you to a designer, but it can't tell you who the designer is. That's why we have supernatural revelation from God in the Bible.
And in theology, we refer to natural or general revelation, which, as you said, will show us that there's a God. But then special revelation shows us things like, how can I be saved, which you'd never get from studying the earth.
Right, and that's a very important foundation for us as Christians, because we use that to then better understand the natural world around us. And then we have radiometric dating, which right away everyone realizes this is a very technical concept, and it can get really detailed, and a lot of people just think it's a black box, I can't understand this. But you should be able to describe this fairly simply if you use an analogy, and the one that I particularly use, it does literally bring it home. So when I have an audience and I've got grade schoolers there and I've got elderly grandparents and everywhere in between, I can teach them radiometric dating, the general concepts, by using a simple analogy that they relate to. So I literally ask them, I want you to all picture your kitchen sink at home. And I could tell they're doing that. And I said, I want you to picture that there's a glass sitting in that sink. So they're thinking about that too. And then you need to ask yourself, how long has that glass been sitting in the sink? So this is what they're thinking of. They're not thinking about radiometric dating right now. They're just thinking about their house and the glass sitting in the sink. So they make three major observations. Number one, they observe the size of the glass that's sitting in the sink. Number two, they note that the glass is about half full of water. And number three, they observe the faucet is dripping about a drop per second. With those observations, they make some quick calculations in their head, and they figure, I think the glass has been there maybe an hour. That's how long it might take to fill it up halfway. Well, they just made three major assumptions to come up with that answer, and they didn't even realize that they made these assumptions. Number one, they assumed that the glass was empty to begin with, and I always see smiles on people's faces like, yeah, I guess I did. I don't know why. I said, you don't know that. What if the glass was half full when it was put in there? You walk in 2 seconds later, it's been there an hour. No, it's been there 2 seconds. It was half full to begin with. That was just an assumption. Second assumption they made was that no other sources of water entered that glass. Maybe it was empty to begin with, but someone else walked through, had a bottle of water, dumped it in there, walked out. You come in, you say it's been there an hour. No, it's been there 2 seconds, but an additional source of water went in. You also assume that no water was leaking out the bottom of the glass as well. The third major assumption, though, is that you assume the drip rate that you see now, no question, you assume it was always dripping at 1 second, 1 drop per second. If you're wrong in your assumptions, you're going to be wrong about your conclusion. Maybe the glass was empty, but someone turned it on full blast, filled up halfway, and they slammed it shut, and afterwards it was dripping 1 drop per second. Again, you would be off in your estimation if you're wrong with your assumptions, and that's what happens with radiometric dating in the real world. Quick example, specific one, uranium decays into lead. Uranium-238 will decay into lead-206. This is a real process. We can observe it today, and we have measured it. So what they do is they look at a rock, and they measure how much lead is in there, and they try to guess how long would it take to get that much lead to come slowly from the uranium. So they look at that, and they say it would take about 1 billion years for that to happen, so the rock is about 1 billion years old. Okay, those are the observations, but they made the same three assumptions that we did about the kitchen sink. Number one, when we had assumed the glass was empty, they assumed that the rock was empty when it formed. It didn't have any of that lead in it. Any lead we see actually came slowly from the uranium. Second assumption, no extra water put into our glass. Well, they assumed no extra elements were washed into the rock or actually were even washed out. Well, to say that that rock sat there for 1 billion years with groundwater going in and out of it, and it didn't bring any of the other elements in or out, that's not a good assumption, and that would throw off your estimate. Lastly, we assumed that the water that we see dripping now, it's always been going at that rate. They assume that the slow rate of decay we see today is the rate it's always been. We actually have great scientific evidence now to believe that the decay rate was sped up greatly, maybe millions of times faster than we see today, which again will explain a little bit of why many of these radiometric dates that come out are greatly skewed and wrong, and they contradict each other.
You know, Jay, it seems to me that this would speak to the limitations of observable science in general, in that we can see something, what's happening now, like the water in the sink, but we can't see what happened before unless we have a record of it, unless somebody else saw it. And to draw those kind of assumptions without any evidence is arbitrary.
Right, and that's why their assumptions are very often off, where when we use God's written word, we have a written record of what actually happened. But one other thing, dating methods, many methods that are used to come up with ages don't give you an exact age. They just come up with a limit that according to a certain method, it can't be older than a certain amount of years. The analogy that I use, if two guys were walking out west and they came upon a gold mine that had caved in, they're trying to figure out how long ago did this cave in. And one guy says, I think it caved in 500 years ago. The other guy says, well, how long have we been mining for gold in the United States? Maybe 220 years. They don't know when it caved in, but there's a limit now. Must have been less than 220 years, because prior to that, we didn't have gold mines. Then they look at it closer and they notice there's a digital watch that got buried. How long have we been making digital watches? Let's say maybe 40 years. They still don't know when it caved in, but there's a further limit. Must have been less than 40 years, because if it was beyond that, we wouldn't have had the digital watch. Then they look at the watch more closely and they notice it's still ticking. Well, how long do batteries last? 2, 3 years maybe? They still don't know when it caved in, but there's even further limit, probably less than 3 years, or the battery wouldn't be working anymore. So this is an analogy used to show how many of these dating methods, they don't come up with an exact age, they just tell you a reasonable limit. It could be younger, but it probably can't be any older than that particular age.
Jay, I'm going to have to stop you right there. We need to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.
We hope you're enjoying Origins TV. It all started at Cornerstone Television in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been producing new episodes for over 37 years now. We praise God for the success of the program and are excited to introduce you to Origins and to us. If you're interested in watching more episodes of Origins, you can find them on our YouTube page. Simply go to YouTube and search Cornerstone Television Network. Click the like and subscribe buttons, then you'll find the best episodes of Origins in our playlist. You can also visit our website at ctvn.org/origins. One more way you can stay connected with us is to subscribe to our free monthly Hope Today newsletter, which you can do from our website. And if you have any questions, call us here at Cornerstone Television at 888-665-4483. We'd love to connect with you. Thank you for watching.
Welcome back to Origins. We're talking to Jay Seegert, who's been sharing a little bit about powerful analogies. Jay, we began the program looking at how our Lord used the concept of analogy in order to explain difficult ideas regarding believing in His Word and having salvation. And we left off before the break where we showed that while analogies don't provide new information or maybe prove specific points, they do, and they are useful for communicating how we can show limits, like the watch in the cave. We recognize immediately that there's a limit to how far we can go.
Yeah, and it's very important for people to understand there are no clocks in nature, none. And that's where everyone says, well, wait a minute, we got radiometric dating, we got carbon-14 dating. No, there are no clocks in nature. We just have a lot of processes that we can observe, and when you make assumptions about the processes, you can turn them into a clock, but the clocks will only be as good as the assumptions that you're making about them.
And I know in a lot of these processes recently, we've discovered that there are things that can change the rate. For example, the layers of ice, we've seen that multiple layers can come down in 1 year, even though it was often assumed that 1 layer per year. And so even in the processes, we know, hey, wait a minute, even from what we just see, this process isn't always the same.
Right, our assumptions aren't always correct. Same thing with tree ring dating. You assume 1 ring per year. Well, we know you can get multiple rings per year. So we have to check out what our assumptions are behind any of these dating methods. And we'll take a brief look at natural selection and mutations. Quick side note, natural selection is not a force of nature that acts upon things and does things. It's a description of what we see happening in nature, that those creatures that are fit tend to survive. Those that aren't, they get wiped out. But it's not this force doing something. But most people think it's something that Darwin came up with in proof of evolution. Edward Blythe thought of it about 24 years before Darwin even wrote about it, and it fits in perfectly with Scripture that God created everything perfect. Mankind sinned, that brought death and a curse into his creation. Things have been going downhill ever since, and some things can't handle the changes and they go extinct. So natural selection is related to that. It absolutely cannot create anything new. It just works with what already exists. So they know that natural selection is not providing new information, and we also know that mutations don't provide the amount of information that we would need either. But I'm going to be making an analogy related to natural selection and mutations and how the environment supposedly causes creatures to adapt. They say changes happen and then it causes creature to adapt and evolve, further on down the line.
Well, it's important too to notice, Jay, what you said there is based upon observable science, that when we say that natural selection sure can show forth the adaptability within a creature, but we've never seen natural selection produce, an elephant from a rhinoceros or something like that. I mean, that's the thing, though, that they need. They need natural selection to go from one creature to another, and that's never been observed.
We don't observe that. There are limits. Things would reproduce after their kind, just like Genesis says 10 times. And so when we do see changes in the environment, that's unquestionable. So when it gets colder outside, I ask people, when the temperature drops, does that create a thermostat in a furnace in your house? They say, no, it doesn't create it.
Well, that would be helpful to builders.
That would be kind of nice, save us some money. What happens is we have a thermostat and a furnace in the house, and they were designed to detect changes in the environment. So when the temperature drops, thermostat sends a signal to the furnace, and it turns it on, and it provides heat throughout the home. They were designed ahead of time to monitor changes in the environment and then respond appropriately. It's the same thing with God's creatures. He designed them to be able to detect variations in the environment and then respond appropriately by turning certain genes on and certain off. The environment didn't create these new genes. It just triggers some to be inactivated and others not to be used.
We've seen that in our yard. We actually live, sort of in a suburb, but like most places in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of deer, and they get everywhere. And if you observe the deer, in the fall versus in the spring, their coats look very different. And, they're adjusting for the winters that we get, and then they're adjusting for the summer. And to me, that's proof, again, of what we've been saying, that, well, God has programmed that in. This creature can adapt and live in a climate like this. But there are some creatures, we don't have alligators in Pennsylvania. Sure. They can't handle that. And so there's a certain amount of adaptability that determines even what environment that you can go to.
Sure, and the genes are triggered. The creature isn't trying to do something different. It's just that genes are responding to these changes. We can also use an analogy with the origin of life. Again, with the time we have, we're just going to ask this question of what are the chances that somehow these dead chemicals could come together to form a living cell, which is what they tell us happened 3.8 billion years ago. Well, the number I'm going to give you comes from Sir Frederick Hoyle. He was one of the world's leading astronomers and mathematicians. He was actually an atheist for most of his life. But he said the chances that these chemicals could come together in the supposedly billions of years is just one chance in. That's where I always pause and ask a question. What's your cutoff? What does that mean? Well, if you find out that the chances are less than one chance in some number, you're going to conclude, okay, yeah, that can't be an accident. It must have been designed. Well, what's your number? Because if you don't have a number, nothing I share is going to make any difference or any sense at all. We need some criteria here. So let's, for argument's sake, say you throw out a big number, one chance in 10 million billion. Okay, well, what was Sir Frederick Hoyle's number? He said one chance in 10 raised to the 40,000th power. That's a 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. So we ask, is that number bigger than our number, 10 million billion? A little bit. It's 10 million billion times 10 million billion times 10 million billion times 10 million billion, 2,500 times. You have to multiply that number by itself to finally get his number.
Starting to look like the national debt there.
Yeah, it's getting there. But my point for this presentation is this is just a massive number, a 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. It's almost useless because it's so big. So we need an analogy here for people to understand how big this really is. I bring up the Rubik's Cube. Most people have played with one. A Rubik's Cube has a lot of different combinations to it. In fact, it has 10 million trillion combinations, meaning if you were blindfolded, spinning it away randomly, you have one chance in 10 million trillion of getting it right. Let's compare solving that cube by accident to the large numbers Sir Frederick Hoyle gave us. It'd be like me handing you the cube, putting the blindfold on, you start spinning it away randomly, and you solve the cube 2,105 times in a row, getting it right every single time. Now people have a little better idea how big that number is because of the analogy that we used.
You know, Jay, I've often thought of this too. Let's say we get that cell and it's there. What happens? The cell dies. Then you have to get, that cell has to form another cell and another cell and another cell. It's like even if we would grant them a cell, the cell's going to die in a year, 2 years, whatever it is. You know, that's really not even going to help them in the end. They have to get from that cell to everything, the processes of sexual and asexual reproduction and everything else.
Yeah, this is just the beginning, but this is one of the biggest problems. How do you even get the process started? It's so much of a problem, they don't even really want to talk about this portion.
Well, Jay, once again, it's been wonderful to have you on the program. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
You know, when we're defending our faith or arguing for the truth of creation, things can get pretty complex very quickly. But if we remember that the goal is to communicate God's truth in an understandable way, we would do better to use analogies of simple things that everyone knows. In this way, we follow God's own pattern of revealing Himself in the things that He has made. And it just goes to show you that we know what the Bible says is true, and the proof, it's all around you. We'd like to thank you for watching this episode of Origins, and I'd like to remind you that if we could use your help in keeping this kind of creation television program on the air, it's by your prayers and by your financial support that we're able to make these programs, and it's making an impact. So prayerfully consider how you can help us, and let's work together to reveal how awesome our Creator really is. And we'll see you next time on Origins.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. For a DVD of this series, you can order online or send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins Program number 2212, Cornerstone Network, Wall, Pennsylvania, 15148.
This presentation was made possible by the faithful prayers and financial support of you, our Cornerstone family.